When I was a kid, and I grew up, of course, in this family that some would say was music royalty. I mean, Johnny Cash and June Carter. Still, they were good-hearted, simple people, and that's what I remember.
For decades, the world has celebrated the name Cash as more than just music. It's a legacy of rebellion, heartbreak, and faith. But now, Johnny and June's only son, John Carter Cash, is breaking headlines in a way that no one expected. Raised in the shadow of two of the most legendary figures in American music history, John Carter has always been more than just a footnote. He's been a producer, a writer, a performer in his own right, but his name has also been tied to controversies, struggles, and a lifelong battle to carry the weight of his parents' legacy. Recent revelations have put him squarely in the public eye once again, and what's coming to light is stirring fans, critics, and family alike. Is John Carter Cash finally stepping into his own identity? Or is the shadow of Johnny and June too heavy to ever escape? This is the untold story behind the breaking headlines. From the very moment John Carter Cash entered this world on March 3, 1970, he was not simply a child, he was a symbol. The son of Johnny Cash and June Carter, two towering figures in country music, his life was scripted in the eyes of the public long before he could write his own story. For fans, he was the miracle child, born into a family that embodied the very soul of American music. But for John Carter, that blessing was also a burden. Imagine growing up and realizing that every step you took, every decision you made, would forever be compared to two legends who defined not just an era, but a culture. His father, the man in black, wasn't just a performer. He was an icon of resilience and rebellion. His mother, June, was more than a singer. She was the heart that held Johnny together through his darkest storms. How could anyone live up to that? Even as a child, the expectations pressed down on him. His parents took him on tour buses, into recording studios, and across stages around the world. Music wasn't a choice, it was in his blood. But with that inheritance came whispers, questions, and the weight of judgment. Would he have his father's voice? Would he write songs like his mother's family, the Carters, who practically invented country music harmonies? Or would he falter under the crushing expectations of a name that carried so much history? For John Carter, there was never anonymity. Wherever he went, the shadow of Johnny and June followed close behind. As he grew older, those shadows lengthened. Teachers, friends, and industry insiders didn't see John Carter as just a boy. They saw him as the Cash Kid. He was expected to embody the grit of Johnny and the grace of June. But in truth, he was neither. He was his own person, struggling to define a self in the midst of giants. And yet, even when he tried to step away, the music always pulled him back. By the time he reached adulthood, the burden of legacy wasn't something he could ignore. It had become a part of his very identity. He once said in interviews that he felt both blessed and haunted by his parents' fame. Blessed because the world loved them so deeply. Haunted because he would forever be measured by their greatness, not his own. But the world doesn't often consider what it means to inherit a legacy like that. Behind the glamour of awards, platinum records, and fan devotion lies a quiet pressure that gnaws at the soul. John Carter Cash carried the unspoken responsibility of not just preserving his parents' music, but preserving their humanity. To millions, Johnny and June were untouchable figures. To him, they were simply mom and dad. Balancing those two truths would become his life's greatest challenge. And as the headlines began to circle around him, it became clear that the burden of the Cash name would shape not only his career, but his destiny. When John Carter Cash finally stepped into the professional world of music, he carried not only his last name, but also the unspoken expectation that he would carry the torch of his parents' artistry. Rather than attempt to stand front and center as a superstar, he found his place behind the scenes, shaping soundscapes, polishing voices, and preserving the essence of the country tradition that ran through his blood. His career as a record producer became his defining mark, and through it, he established himself as far more than just the child of legends. Working with his father in the later years of Johnny's life, John Carter played a pivotal role in helping craft the deeply personal recordings that would become part of the American recording series with producer Rick Rubin. While Rubin's name often dominated the spotlight, those who looked closer recognized that John Carter's steady presence was vital. He served as a bridge between his father's raw, aching voice and the polished studio sessions, ensuring that Johnny's vision remained intact until the very end. After his parents' passing, John Carter carried the heavy responsibility of ensuring their music didn't fade into nostalgia, but lived on for future generations. He produced posthumous projects for his father, carefully curating unreleased tracks, demo tapes, and archival material to give fans not only what they wanted, but what Johnny himself might have intended. Each release was more than just an album. It was a sacred duty, a conversation with the past that only he was entrusted to lead. His reach extended beyond the Cash family name. He became a trusted producer for giants like Loretta Lynn, Chris Christopherson, Vince Gill, Emmylou Harris, and even contemporary voices seeking to touch the authenticity of country's golden age. Artists gravitated toward him not only for his technical skill, but for the aura he carried, the living link to one of music's greatest dynasties. But with success came criticism. Some accused him of leaning too heavily on the Cash name, claiming his opportunities were handed to him on a silver platter. Others questioned his choices in what material to release from Johnny and June's archives, asking if it was truly in line with their wishes or if it was a way to keep the family's commercial engine alive. John Carter often deflected such criticism, insisting his work was rooted in love and preservation, not profit. Beyond production, he ventured into performing himself. He recorded his own albums, blending folk, gospel, and country influences into deeply personal projects. Yet, despite the quality, his solo efforts never reached the mainstream recognition that his parents enjoyed. Still, those who listened closely found something different in his music, an intimacy, a gentleness, and an honesty that reflected a man not chasing fame, but seeking truth through sound. He also expanded his artistry into writing, authoring books about his parents' lives, memoirs, and even children's stories. Each project revealed his desire to carve out his own identity, even as he remained tethered to the memory of Johnny and June. In many ways, his production career became his shield, allowing him to shape music without having to live constantly in the unforgiving glare of the spotlight. Yet, the headlines rarely let him slip fully into the background. Every production, every release, every book he published was scrutinized, framed not as the work of John Carter Cash, but as the continuing saga of the Cash legacy. And while he achieved recognition in the industry, the question always lingered: was his career celebrated for his own talents, or because of the name etched into history before him? For all the professional accomplishments John Carter Cash has earned, his personal life has often reflected the same turbulence and contradictions that defined his parents' journey. Growing up in the spotlight left scars that fame couldn't hide, and as much as he inherited their musical gifts, he also inherited their struggles with identity, relationships, and inner peace. John Carter has been married more than once, and each chapter of his personal relationships has been closely observed by those eager to measure the son of Johnny Cash against impossible standards. His first marriage to Mary Mabry ended in divorce, followed by his marriage to Laura Weber White, with whom he shares children, and later to singer-songwriter Anna Christina Cash, a union that once again placed him directly in the musical lineage of his heritage. But like his father before him, John Carter's family life has not been without storms. The constant media scrutiny, the pressures of managing his parents' legacy, and the demands of his own artistic pursuits often collided with the responsibilities of being a husband and father. Friends have said that beneath his calm public demeanor lies a man constantly at war with himself, torn between duty and desire, between the public image of the Cash heir and the private longing to simply be John. There were also whispers of struggles with substance abuse and emotional turmoil, mirroring the very demons that haunted Johnny Cash in his prime. While John Carter has spoken sparingly about such matters, his rare admissions reveal a man who understands both the destructive power of addiction and the resilience it takes to overcome it. He has leaned heavily on faith, drawing inspiration from his mother's spiritual grounding. But even faith has not shielded him from the isolation that fame can bring. At times, his life has seemed to be a cycle of rebuilding trust, rebuilding relationships, rebuilding his sense of self after each setback. His children have become the quiet center of his world, and those close to him say fatherhood transformed him. Yet even in fatherhood, the expectations never disappeared. Just as he bore the weight of being Johnny and June's son, his children now bear the weight of being grandchildren of music royalty. John Carter, perhaps more than anyone, understands the danger of those shadows, and he has fought to give his kids something he never had: the freedom to define themselves without the constant burden of legacy. Still, the struggles remain. He has often described the loneliness of carrying his family's name. To fans, Johnny and June are immortal figures frozen in time. But to him, they were flawed, fragile human beings he lost far too soon. Living with that duality, being the keeper of their legacy while carrying the grief of their absence, has been one of his deepest personal battles. Every milestone in his own life is measured against the ache of what they would have thought, what they would have said, and whether he has lived up to their standards. It is in these struggles that John Carter's humanity becomes most visible. Behind the headlines and the fame lies a man who has known heartbreak, who has stumbled and risen again, who has sought love and belonging just like anyone else. Yet unlike most, he has done so with the eyes of the world watching. His personal life, marked by both resilience and fragility, mirrors the same contradictions that made his parents so beloved: strength and vulnerability, triumph and tragedy, glory and brokenness. And as the spotlight turns once more toward him in recent headlines, those struggles, past and present, have once again become impossible to ignore. After the deaths of Johnny Cash in 2003 and June Carter Cash just months earlier that same year, John Carter Cash suddenly found himself standing at the crossroads of history. He was no longer simply the son of two icons. He had become the keeper of their legacy. For many, this was a responsibility too great for one man to bear. But John Carter took it on with the seriousness of someone who understood both the weight and the fragility of memory. He was tasked not only with preserving the music, but with preserving the truth of who his parents were as people, stripped of myth and legend. The Carter Cash archives were vast, filled with tapes, writings, personal items, and unreleased recordings that represented the hidden chapters of a story the world thought it already knew. John Carter became the guardian of that vault, curating what to share and what to protect. Each decision carried consequences. If he chose to release a lost track from Johnny's final years, fans celebrated, but critics questioned whether it was what Johnny would have wanted. If he held something back, there were accusations of hiding treasures from the people who worshipped his father's music. This delicate balance became the center of his life's work. In 2014, he produced Out Among the Stars, an album of previously unheard Johnny Cash material from the 1980s. The release reignited the world's fascination with his father, reminding fans of Johnny's timeless voice and vulnerability. But behind the applause was debate. Was John Carter honoring his father's artistry or commercializing the archives? For him, the answer was clear. He was carrying on his father's conversation with the world, one that never truly ended. Beyond the studio, John Carter also became the curator of the Carter family legacy. He oversaw tributes, books, and documentaries, working tirelessly to ensure that the Carter Cash dynasty wasn't reduced to old photographs and fading memories. He spoke at events, appeared in documentaries, and collaborated with museums and institutions to enshrine his parents' impact. To him, this wasn't about business, it was about faithfulness. "Their story isn't over," he once said, "and as long as I'm here, I'll make sure it continues." But such guardianship came at a cost. The wider Carter and Cash families didn't always agree on how legacies should be handled. Royalties, estate disputes, and the commercialization of family history created tensions that spilled into the public eye. For John Carter, each controversy chipped away at his desire for peace. He was caught between loyalty to his parents' wishes and the scrutiny of a world that felt ownership over their memory. And yet, he never walked away. Instead, he doubled down, publishing books like House of Cash that combined personal memoir with historical preservation, offering glimpses into the humanity of his parents, while reminding fans that behind the legends were flawed, loving, complex individuals. Preserving the legacy also meant wrestling with his own place in it. John Carter has admitted that it's strange to spend a lifetime defined by his parents, yet he accepts that destiny has bound him to the Carter Cash story forever. He has often said that his goal is not to be Johnny or June, but to be the voice that reminds the world why they mattered. The preservation of the Cash legacy isn't just about the past. It's about keeping it alive for generations who never saw Johnny in black on stage or June's smile at the Opry. Through his work, John Carter ensures that their songs are not relics, but living testaments. Still, as recent headlines suggest, the weight of this duty is heavy, and the questions of whether he has done it right or whether he has done enough continue to follow him. For all of John Carter Cash's dedication to preserving his parents' memory, controversy has often followed him like an echo of the same storms that once surrounded Johnny and June. The public loves its legends, but when someone dares to manage their legacies, questions of money, intention, and authenticity are never far behind. From the moment he took control of the Cash estate, critics began whispering, was he protecting his father's music or profiting from it? Each posthumous release was scrutinized, every decision dissected by fans, historians, and even members of the extended family. When Out Among the Stars was released in 2014, many praised the album as a gift, a long-lost treasure that allowed Johnny's voice to live again. Yet others asked why it had been shelved for decades, and whether the songs were meant to see the light of day. John Carter insisted his father would have wanted the world to hear them, but the debate left scars. It wasn't the first time, nor the last. Disputes over royalties and estate rights spilled into the press, with stories of friction among relatives and legal arguments that painted a less romantic picture of the Carter Cash dynasty. John Carter often found himself portrayed as the gatekeeper, sometimes noble, sometimes suspect. To those who loved Johnny and June, every action felt personal, as though he wasn't just managing archives, but rewriting history itself. Beyond estate matters, John Carter faced criticism over his own public behavior. In 2014, he was arrested at an airport in Canada after allegedly stripping to his underwear in public during what authorities called a disturbance. He later attributed the bizarre incident to exhaustion and a reaction to medication, but the headlines spread quickly. For many, it was a moment that humanized him, showing that even the heir to legends could stumble in ways both dramatic and humiliating. Still, others saw it as evidence that he was not the stable guardian fans wished to see at the helm of the Cash name. Every controversy, no matter how small, carried weight because of who he was. There were also those who criticized his artistic ventures outside of music. His books, including memoirs and novels, were received with mixed reviews. Some applauded his honesty and insight, while others dismissed them as attempts to cash in on the family story. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, but perception has always been John Carter's greatest enemy. No matter what he produced, music, literature, or film, it was filtered through the lens of his parents' legacy. The world rarely asked, "Is this good?" Instead, it asked, "Would Johnny and June have approved?" Yet, perhaps the harshest backlash came not from critics or the press, but from the silent expectations of fans who held his parents so dearly in their hearts. To them, Johnny and June were not just entertainers. They were symbols of redemption, love, and resilience. Any misstep by John Carter felt like a betrayal of that myth, even when his intentions were pure. He has lived in a paradox, praised when he brings new life to the archives, condemned when people feel he's gone too far. The controversies surrounding him are less about him as a man, and more about the impossibility of satisfying a world that clings desperately to the ghosts of legends. And so, the headlines have continued to cast John Carter in a double light: the faithful son trying to protect a sacred legacy, and the flawed man caught in the relentless spotlight of judgment. In truth, he has been both. His life has become a mirror of his father's, marked by brilliance and backlash, reverence and rebellion, victories and failures. But as the latest stories show, John Carter Cash's journey is still unfolding, and with every step, the weight of controversy seems to follow close behind. While music and preservation have defined much of John Carter Cash's public life, his creative spirit has always sought expression beyond the studio walls. Unlike his father, who lived and died by the rhythm of performance, John Carter often gravitated toward quieter forms of storytelling. Writing became one of his earliest outlets, a way to navigate the chaos of legacy and give voice to the parts of himself that could never be captured in a melody. He authored several books, including House of Cash, a memoir that opened doors into the private world of his family, revealing both the tenderness and the turbulence that shaped him. He also ventured into fiction, crafting novels and even children's stories that showcased his ability to step outside the shadow of Johnny and June and create something entirely his own. Each book reflected a man determined to prove that he was more than a curator of memories. He was an artist in his own right. Yet, as with his music, the world rarely judged his work without comparison. Critics asked whether his writing would have found a publisher without the Cash name on the cover, while fans searched every page for glimpses of Johnny's voice or June's warmth. It was an impossible standard, but one he continued to face head-on. His creativity didn't stop with the written word. John Carter expanded into filmmaking, working on documentaries and short projects that blended his love for storytelling with his duty to keep his parents' legacies alive. He contributed to films about Johnny Cash's life, sometimes appearing on camera, other times shaping narratives behind the scenes. In each project, he walked the delicate line between history and myth, reminding viewers that while Johnny and June were icons, they were also human beings. John Carter also experimented with his own music, releasing albums under his name that mixed folk, country, and gospel influences. While none reached the commercial heights of his father's work, they offered something different, an intimate look at his own soul. Songs often touched on themes of faith, loss, and redemption, echoing the struggles he carried privately, but rarely spoke of publicly. There were also collaborations that revealed his versatility. He worked with artists outside of country, lending his skills as a producer and songwriter to projects that stretched beyond Nashville's borders. This willingness to experiment showed a man unafraid of stepping into unfamiliar spaces, even if the world preferred to keep him frozen in the role of Johnny's son. But no matter how far he reached, the comparisons always returned. If his books sold, people said it was because of his last name. If his music found listeners, critics said they came for curiosity, not for him. If a film succeeded, the headlines reminded audiences that he was a cash before they acknowledged his contributions as an individual. Still, John Carter never stopped creating. For him, creativity was not about applause or validation, but survival. In interviews, he has spoken about how art kept him steady through grief, through controversy, and through the crushing expectations of carrying the family mantle. To create was to breathe. To tell stories was to remind himself and the world that he was more than a vessel for history. His ventures beyond music may not have earned him the global recognition his parents commanded, but they revealed a man unafraid to bare his soul in whatever form it took: song, story, or screen. And in those quiet acts of creativity, John Carter Cash found a fragile kind of freedom that the spotlight could never offer. In recent months, John Carter Cash has found himself back in the spotlight as headlines swirl around him once again, not because of his parents' legacy, but because of his own choices and revelations. News outlets have reported on a series of projects he has undertaken, from newly uncovered recordings in the Cash family vault to intimate personal disclosures that peel back layers of secrecy long kept from the public eye. One of the most striking stories has been his decision to open up about previously unheard Johnny Cash material that he claims will change the way fans understand my father. These recordings, some dating back decades, are said to capture Johnny at his most vulnerable, offering songs and conversations never before released. For fans, this is a gift, but for critics, it reignites the debate. Should every hidden moment of an icon's life be put on display, or are some pieces of history meant to remain private? John Carter has insisted that his intentions are rooted in honoring his father's voice, saying that Johnny himself believed in sharing truth, even if it was uncomfortable. At the same time, the headlines have highlighted more personal aspects of his life. Interviews and features have revealed his struggles with health, his ongoing efforts to maintain sobriety and stability, and his reflections on what it means to carry his family's name at this stage of his life. He has spoken candidly about the pressures of being Johnny and June's son, admitting that the burden has at times nearly broken him. Yet, in the same breath, he has expressed gratitude for the love and faith that still flows from fans around the world. His marriage to Anna Christina Cash has also been in the news, with the couple sharing glimpses of their family life, their children, and the ways they balance music with parenthood. For some, these stories humanize him, making him more relatable than the mythic aura of his parents. For others, they spark curiosity about whether his public openness is genuine or carefully crafted for attention. The headlines have also captured whispers of renewed family disputes. Reports suggest disagreements among relatives about estate matters and future projects, with John Carter once again caught in the middle. Some relatives feel that too much has been revealed, that the Cash name should be guarded more closely. Others argue that his efforts keep the legacy alive for younger generations. The public, meanwhile, watches every development with fascination, as though the Carter Cash family is less a private clan and more a living legend whose every move belongs to history. And yet, beneath all the noise, one thing has become clear. John Carter Cash is no longer simply the son of Johnny and June. He is a man telling his own story, through music, through words, and through the way he chooses to live. The breaking headlines reflect not just controversy, but transformation. They show a man who has carried his parents' torch for decades, finally daring to let the world see him as he is, flawed, resilient, creative, and still searching for peace. Whether celebrated or criticized, John Carter Cash remains a figure the world cannot ignore. The headlines are proof that the Cash name is still alive, still commanding attention, and still stirring emotions nearly 2 decades after Johnny and June left this earth. And for John Carter, that weight is both his greatest honor and his greatest challenge.